All right, you might remember that back in early May, we reported here and at The Intercept that AIPAC, the lobby group that describes itself as pro-Israel, was secretly intervening in a congressional primary in Portland, Oregon, in order to block the sister of Pramila Jayapal, her name's Sushila Jayapal, from winning an open primary. Now, I reported that AIPAC was routing its money through a super PAC that claims to have a pro-science mission called 314 Action, and that it also appeared AIPAC was funneling money through a different PAC called Voters for Responsive Government. AIPAC's allies furiously denied the reporting, arguing it played into anti-Semitic tropes. Yet about a week later, Jayapal's opponent, Maxine Dexter, was forced to disclose some of her last-minute surge in funding, and it turned out it was coming from donors who regularly gave to AIPAC. One of the donors who had maxed out to Dexter even told me she wasn't aware of the contribution, but that she greenlights whatever AIPAC asks her to do. She told me, quote, "I give all my contributions through AIPAC." Still, they refused to disclose their super PAC spending down the stretch. And 314 Action even brazenly lied about the source of the money. And when I say that they lied, I mean they straight up bald-faced lied. The super PACs were relying on a campaign rule that treats them differently than candidates. Candidates have to disclose every 48 hours down the stretch of the campaign so nobody can sneak in new money. But super PACs only have to disclose their previous month's funding on the 20th day of the next month. The election was scheduled for May 21st, and on May 20th, super PACs would have had to declare all of their fundraising from April on May 20th. Now, Voters for Responsive Government filed a report that claimed it had not raised or spent a single penny in April. Yet they had ads out to the market by May 2nd. In other words, they're claiming they raised money, hired contractors, produced ads, set up bank accounts, and placed a media buy all in 24 hours, with none of that work happening in April. Of course, that's basically impossible. But the reason they needed to make that claim on their paperwork was so that they could then delay disclosure of everything all the way until June 20th, a month after the election. 314 Action also pushed a ton of their action into their May paperwork. So on May 20th, that's the day before the election, they only disclosed 3 donors. One of them was an AIPAC guy who gave them $350,000. Another was Michael Bloomberg, and another was unrelated to the race. Now, I've been covering politics for about 20 years or so, and I've seen my share of dishonesty. But what came next reminded me I still know how to be shocked. Eric Polyak, the managing director of 314 Action, took to Twitter on May 20th after they released their donors to taunt me, saying, quote, "Waiting on Ryan Grimm to issue a retraction." What's so stunning about this denial is that when Eric made it on May 20th, he knew that on May 1st, 314 Action had cashed a $1 million check from United Democracy Project, AIPAC's super PAC. And he knew that a month later, on June 20th, that fact would become public. Yet he decided to knowingly lie to the public anyway. Here it is in 314 Action's June 20th filing. So that's a lot of zeros on the small screen there, but I can count them for you. There's 6 of them. That's $1 million. In other words, Polyak knew his organization was spending $1 million of AIPAC's money on top of lots more from AIPAC-directed donors, yet he said exactly the opposite the day before the election. Now, on May 2nd, a few days before my article initially confirmed AIPAC's role in the race, Jayapal and her opponent, Eddie Morales, held a rare joint press conference raising questions about the source of the new money in the race. Polyak took to Twitter to mock them. He wrote, after Sushila Jayapal and Eddie Morales' Veep-style press conference, where they offered zero evidence to back their ridiculous claims, it's clear they're down in the polls and desperate to smear our grassroots movement fueled by millions of contributions. So consider the audacity there. He claimed to be leading a grassroots movement fueled by millions of contributions the day after they deposited that $1 million check. When Voters for Responsive Government disclosed its donors, we learned that AIPAC had cut them a $1.3 million check, and 8 other AIPAC-linked donors had kicked in $2.6 million more. According to the paperwork they filed, they managed to raise all that money in a single day. Emily, I don't know if you've ever done any fundraising, but calling that many people in a single day and you just getting them on the phone is going to be hard.
All the zeros there, my goodness.
That's a lot. It's just typing in all of those zeros is going to take you more than 24 hours.
So much work for the FEC.
So yeah, what they are banking on is that the FEC will look at this and be like, all right, whatever.
Right.
Who cares? That we don't have enough commissioners. We don't have enough staff. We don't basically enforce laws around here. But even if they had disclosed on May 20th, that still was too late.
Yeah.
Because there's mail-in voting. 80% of the people had already voted at that point. That was just to kind of twist the knife to just keep it so that you didn't even have 24 hours to know who was funding that race.
Isn't it just
and
a fine?
Jayapal lost, just to be clear.
Right, yeah, she lost. And isn't it just a fine if you're non-compliant with FEC deadlines?
Yeah, and they might not even get a fine if the FEC doesn't bother with it.
When even, let's say the FEC does bother with it.
Yeah, it'd be a fine.
It's sort of like when, a ExxonMobil gets a fine.
Yeah.
It's just the cost of doing business when you have enough money.
They spent $4 million in a couple of weeks.
Yeah.
They can afford a little fine.
This is totally unrelated, but Li Fong, your old colleague Li Fong had a great story he ran in The Guardian this week about basically these pro-Israel groups that had been lobbying on behalf of Israeli government apparatuses. Nobody had registered for FARA. And again, it's the same thing that the cost of compliance sometimes, or the cost of non-compliance, is just worth the non-compliant. It's just worth whatever you get out of it.
Expect it's going to be prosecuted, yeah.
Yeah, and when there's a timeline, there's like an actual election that you can squeeze this past. I mean, it's just, this should, especially given the AIPAC spending patterns, this should give people pause for the next couple of years about what's happening in some of these races around the country. And obviously you're eagle-eyed and keeping your own reporting focused on this, but it's got to get into the local papers. Local reporters have to pay attention to this stuff for the purpose of ads. People should be paying attention to this stuff. That's really dirty.
And I talked to some local reporters who were trying to report it out.
That's right.
At the time, but they wrote a couple okay stories where they would say this looks awfully fishy, but they didn't have the sourcing to be able to just confirm that they didn't have the sourcing that I had that said oh yeah, this is definitely AIPAC.
Right.
And so it makes it very tough for, and especially, journalists that don't want to get accused of trafficking in anti-Semitic tropes, because you can't just go around just recklessly suggesting without evidence that AIPAC is funding a particular super PAC. If you have the evidence, you can say it. And they couldn't quite prove it because AIPAC had done a good enough job of keeping its fingerprints off of the money until afterwards. It's very smart in a way because it makes you sound crazy when you're saying it in real time.
Right.
You sound like a conspiracy theorist or a lunatic.
Right.
But then afterwards, oh yeah, that was us.
Yeah.
And after the polls closed, AIPAC was like, this shows that being pro-Israel is good politics. It's like, well, if that's true, why didn't you endorse her publicly? Why did you deny that this was happening? Why did you go to
why would you have to
extreme,
spend so much?
Why did you have to spend so much? And why did you have to go to such extreme lengths to conceal the role of a pro-Israel organization in this race?
Yeah.
That doesn't, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
You can't say that your involvement shows that being pro-AIPAC is good politics at the same time that you're hiding the fact that AIPAC was even involved.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, great reporting, crazy stuff, dirty stuff.
Yeah, it's crazy. And what Democrats have realized is that the vulnerability for other Democrats here is not that it's AIPAC money, it's not that it's pro-Israel money. There was polling done in the district where most voters in Portland had absolutely no idea who AIPAC even was.
Right.
Because we think everybody knows who AIPAC is because this is something we cover closely.
You think everybody knows what AIPAC is.
Okay, I do. You always have to remind yourself that we are weirdos. We're unusual.
Yes.
That we follow politics this closely. Most voters what's AIPAC? Never heard of AIPAC.
Absolutely.
What Democratic voters don't like, however, is Republican rich people spending money in Democratic primaries. And if you scroll back and look at that list of the 8 people that gave, for instance, I think you'll find all of those are Republican donors. And not just we give to both, but mostly Republican donors.
Right.
A lot of Trump donors. And that drives Democratic primary voters crazy. Summer Lee was able to use that to her advantage in the Pittsburgh race. Others have been able to use that to their advantage. But by hiding the donors until after the election, you strip Democrats of the ability to say, this is actually Republican money. Because you could say it's AIPAC money if you can report that and you have some evidence, but without knowing who the specific donors are, you can't necessarily say it's Republican money, even though most AIPAC money is Republican money.
Right. I mean, it's just dirty. It's dirty, dirty stuff.
Right. And look, if AIPAC wants to spend $17 million in Jamal Bowman's race,
right,
have at it.
Right.
And at least in that race, they did it, with their chest.
That's so true.
Yeah.
And they got backlash, or they're starting to get backlash based on those those off-the-record comments to Axios this morning. I don't know how much of that you've heard from even relatively pro-Israel Democrats who are getting very uncomfortable with AIPAC's tactics. This story should be another part of that.
Yes, it should be, but we'll see, because from the Democratic leadership's perspective, I think as long as AIPAC, sticks with its mission of being pro-Israel and does not carry the agenda of their donors, their further agenda of the donors, which is a Republican agenda, because these are Republicans. As long as they stick with pro-Israel agenda, and as long as they only go after progressives in primaries, then I think Democratic leadership sees that as a win-win.
Yeah, probably.
Like, that's fine, actually.
Probably.
You're gonna discipline our left flank?
Yep.
Works for us.
Yeah, sounds great.
Yeah. So, but any time that you make a deal with people who are not your allies, and these Republican donors are quite literally your political adversaries, you're taking a huge gamble. And so the question is this kind of enemy is my friend situation really that clever, or are you going to wind up getting eaten by it?
It also becomes a crutch, when that money dries up. If the money dries up in 10 years or whatever, you are just left out without a huge funding source.
It also suppresses what your kind of organic coalition believes about a major political issue.
Yeah, absolutely.
And distances you further from your voters.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It happened with a lot of the libertarian spending, Coke spending for Republicans over the years, sort of lost touch with the support for a social safety net among a lot of Republican
and that's
voters.
very interesting. And then look what they got, Trump.
Yep. So who will be Democrats Trump?
Yeah, there you go. Okay. I think we might find out. We stick around long enough.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.